The night between the stars was quiet and wide and full of cold light. Then a new light came, and it was not gentle. A fleet unfolded across human space like a silver net. Ships long and smooth, with skins that healed when scratched and armor that shone like fresh ice. The Immortal Empire had arrived. They called themselves perfect. They believed time had chosen them above all others. They had ended disease on their worlds and slowed decay in their bodies, and they wore their long years like crowns. To them, immortal life looked like a candle in wind, and humanity was only another small flame to be covered by a careful hand. Their message reached every relay and every colony with a voice that had no warmth. It said, surrender and be guided by those who know better. It said, hand your worlds to our care. It said the young should listen to the old, and you are very young. The words carried the sweet weight of a promise and the hard edge of a threat. And on many stations the lights flickered as people stopped what they were doing to listen. On the rock called Gray Belt Station, a miner named Mark stood in a cargo bay with dust on his sleeves and a coil of cable on his shoulder. He listened with everyone else. The message ended, the silence after it felt long. Someone near him let out a slow breath and someone else whispered a prayer. Mark felt his heart beat once like a drum, and then calm returned to him like a tide. Pulling back from shore, he looked at the people gathered there, welders and farmers and cooks and pilots. Faces lined by hard work and not enough sleep. He saw fear, but under the fear he also saw something steady that he knew well. It was the look of people who had lived through bad storms and worse winters. Across the fleet, a tall figure in a chamber of glass looked out at the scatter of human lights and smiled, with the still smile of someone who had forgotten what it meant to lose. The immortal commander had watched suns rise and fall for more years than most languages could count. He thought of this new species as clever but soft, a branch that could bend without breaking. He sent a second message to Earth and to the colonies. This one with a timer and a list of expected acts of surrender. He expected to see panic. He expected to see ships try to run and ports try to plead. He expected to be bored by noon Gray Belt Station, did not send a plea. The last sound from them was a short reply from a voice the commander found annoyingly calm. The voice said, we hear you, stand by, that was all. Then the station went dim, and the broadcast cut, and the windows of the cargo bay turned from warm gold to a low red glow. The miners and their families did not scream. They moved. One carried a crate, one sealed a hatch. One pulled a child close and told a quiet story to keep small hands from shaking. Mark climbed the stairs to the control deck, 2 steps at a time. The doors slid open, and he found the shift chief and 3 operators bent over a map, their voices quick and quiet. He said, we need to lock power to the outer rings. We need the docks dark and the tunnels warm. We need the old tugs fueled and ready. The chief nodded once and started giving orders. Mark looked at the main board and saw green lines of life for air and water still steady. He felt a wash of relief. And then focus returned like a blade that had just been sharpened. He moved back down to the bay and found his partner, Anna, with a band of younger workers, ready to do anything if someone told them what that anything was. He spoke in simple words because simple words travel faster. He said, we stay calm. We use what we have. We do not fight the way they expect. We will not meet a wall with our heads. We will open a door behind the wall and walk through it. There. Eyes followed him, and he saw hope start as a small spark. He told them to pull the old hull plates from storage, to cut them into decoy shapes, to fasten heat packs to the plates and set them drifting near the wreck field. He told them to reroute air in the gas vents so the station would breathe from hidden lungs if the main vents were cut. He told the tug pilots to drift with no lights and no beacons and to listen for his signal. He told the cooks to make soup and hand it to anyone who looked like a shaking reed. He told the night watch to sing as they walked the tunnels, not for courage alone, but so everyone would hear a human voice and remember they were not alone in a quiet corner. He stopped by the little schoolroom where a teacher named Lena was rolling up blankets to turn the floor into a sleep hall. A child sat on a bench drawing ships on a scrap of paper. The child looked up and asked as it wore. Lena opened her mouth to answer, but the words did not want to come. Mark knelt and said, "It is strangers who think they know us better than we know ourselves." The child nodded as if that made sense and went back to drawing the small ship with a big heart, drawing a human face on the bridge, even if no one could see faces in the real dark of space. On the flagship of the Immortal Empire, the commander received reports like rainfall. His scouts spoke of silent stations and dark windows. He found it curious, and he told himself this calm was only the first stage of fear. He had seen fear many times and he knew its taste, but there was something else in the air he could not name. He ordered a clean strike on Greybelt Station for dawn. He told his gunners to aim for the power ribs and the cum spine and leave the docks for last. He wanted the humans alive to witness a fine lesson. Dawn in a belt station is a lying on a clock, and a mood in the air more than a sunrise. The hour came. Greybelt Station did not cry out. The outer lights stayed low. Inside the cargo bay, Mark stood with Anna and 24 others in cold suits without helmets. Waiting, he felt not large, he felt not special. He felt like a man holding one end of a rope that ran through his chest and into the hands of everyone else on that station. If he let go, the rope would snap and someone would fall. He had no plan for glory. He had only a set of jobs so clear they would shine even if the lights went out. The first spear of light from the fleet lanced toward the station. The hull shook and a rain of metal dust fell from a high beam. People ducked and then straightened and kept moving. The spear hit not the spine but a shell packed with scrap that burst into a cloud so bright and thick that the next two shots veered and lost heat. From the wreck field beyond, the tugs began to drift, each tug towing a decoy plate with a warm heart in its center. To a scanner they looked like ships leaving in panic. The fleet peeled off a wing to chase decoys. The wing found only empty metal and silence inside the power rooms. A line blew, and a woman named Jay threw her whole weight onto a lever that had not moved in years. The old veins woke and power flowed through the hidden route Mark had scratched into a plan 3 winters ago when they had time and no money and a bad feeling. Air kept moving. Water kept humming. In the dark tunnels the night watch sang low and steady like a quiet river. People heard and breathed with the song. Mark checked his band and heard the clicks that meant the decoys were drawing bites, and the kitchen had soup, and the small medroom had clean hands and clean cloth. He heard also the quiet breath of fear held in the chest of the station, and he told the air itself that it was all right to be afraid and still be steady. He raised his hand to Anna, and she raised hers back. The signal for part 2 sat like a bird on his tongue. Not yet, he told himself. Let pride pull them closer. Let habit tell them they already won. On the fleet bridge, the commander leaned forward as the first false targets broke and faded. He frowned a little, as one does when a glass of fine wine tastes slightly off. He ordered the next line of fire and told his boarding crews to prepare. He looked again at the dark station and spoke to himself. Mortals forget that ending is the true teacher. When they see ending, they bow. He did not see the small boats sleeping without lights. He did not see the vents that now breathed through stone. He did not hear the song moving along the tunnels like a thread. Mark put his helmet on at last and sealed the ring tight. He spoke into the band to every ear that was listening. He said, "Hold your places. Keep your breath slow. Watch for the second and third moves, because we will not win on the first. Courage is not loud. Courage is steady like a heart." The hull trembled again, and a cloud of paint drifted down like dark snow. Someone laughed softly when a flake landed on a nose. The laugh moved through the bay and steadied hands better than any order. The Immortal Empire had come to teach surrender. They would learn instead that a short life can carry a long will. The first wave closed. The station dimmed itself to almost night. The last thing Mark saw before the boards went black was the simple face of the child's drawing taped to a console. A small ship with a big heart. He felt ready. He felt awake. And in the breath before the next strike, he gave the signal that would open the door behind the wall and begin the lesson the immortals had never learned. Second wave of fire struck Grey Belt Station with a sound like thunder rolling through. Iron walls shook and lights flickered out. Dust and sparks rained from the ceiling, and still the people did not scream. They gripped rails and held each other and stayed steady. In the cargo bay, Mark felt the tremor run through the deck plates and waited for the reports to come. One by one, the small clicks on his band told him the decoys were still pulling half the fleet away. The hidden vents still breathed. The tug still floated silent among the rocks. The plan was holding, but only just Anna stood by the loading doors. With her rifle slung across her back, she watched the scanners and read the faint lines of heat that slipped through the static. She whispered, "They are coming closer now. They think we are crippled." Mark nodded and told the others to ready the second move. Welders dragged carts stacked with metal scrap and coils of cable to the center of the bay. Old engines that had not fired in years were linked together with thick cords. This was no fleet weapon, but it was power enough to turn junk into fire. They had built it in secret shifts long before the fleet came. They had built it out of fear. And out of hope in the dark tunnels, people moved with purpose. Mothers guided children into corners marked with chalk. Men and women filled buckets from water stores and passed them hand to hand. The night watch sang softer now, but still steady, their voices echoing against stone and steel. The sound carried through vents and shafts until even those working in silence could hear and remember that they were not alone. Lena in the school room told the children stories of the old storms on Earth, when ships of wood sailed oceans and men tied ropes to keep the sails standing. She told them that people always found ways to live in storms above the station. The immortal fleet gathered close. Long silver ships sliding into formation, their weapons glowing with slow deadly light. On the flagship, the commander leaned back in his chair and felt sure again. He thought the false targets had been clever but small. He told himself that mortals were clever in the way insects are clever, able to sting once then die. He ordered the boarding crews forward. He wanted the station taken whole so that its fear could be studied. The first boarding pod struck the hull like iron spears. Walls rang and bent, hatches groaned, alarms flared red in the dark. Mark shouted into his band for all fighters to stand by. Men and women in patched armor picked up rifles and axes and cutters, their faces tight with fear but bright with resolve. Anna climbed to the upper gantry and crouched low, her rifle aimed at the door. The first pod burned through the hull and split open. Armored figures poured out, tall and gleaming, their eyes bright with the glow of unending life. They moved with the calm of beings who did not know the taste of final death. Mark shouted, "Hold your fire. Wait until they are inside." The people crouched behind crates and walls, breath held, hearts loud. The first squad of immortals entered the bay, their steps heavy, their weapons raised. They scanned the shadows expecting quick panic. Instead, a cable snapped and a cart full of scrap metal dropped from the ceiling right into their path. The old engines roared to life and the bay filled with white fire. Shrapnel screamed across the floor and tore through armor. The immortals staggered, some fell. Their bodies tried to heal, but the human rounds carried sharp chemicals that burned the cells faster than they could mend. For the first time in centuries, the soldiers of the Immortal Empire saw their own blood flow without stopping. Anna fired from above, hitting one across the chest. Mark charged with 3 miners at his side, their cutters glowing orange. They fought not with grace, but with fury. The bay became a storm of sparks and smoke. The immortals, still strong but shaken, one fell and did not rise. Another screamed a sound no one thought they could make. Shock spread through their lines. The humans pressed harder. Mark drove his cutter into the joints of a tall soldier's armor, and the man fell heavy. The others pushed forward, shouting to each other names, orders, small words that meant they still fought in the med bay. Lena heard the clash through the walls. She pressed her hands to the shoulders of a wounded man brought in from the outer ring, his chest cut by falling steel. She worked fast with cloth and sealant. Her helpers passed her tools. Children huddled behind the curtain and whispered prayers they did not know but wanted to believe. Lena kept her voice calm, telling the wounded man he would see the sun again. Even though here there was no sun, only the hope of it carried in words. The commander on the flagship leaned forward at last. His smile gone, reports told him his soldiers had been hurt. Some had fallen, impossible he thought. Their bodies do not fail, their cells do not break. Yet the numbers spoke of losses. He clenched his hand on the arm of his chair and ordered. More pods, more fire. He said, drown them in steel and smoke. He said, end this now. Back in the bay, Mark pulled Anna down as another pod burst open. More immortals poured out. The humans fell back step by step, their improvised cannons overheating. Rifles low on charge, the fight turned heavy and close. Mark's arms ached, his breath ragged, yet when he saw Anna covering two miners with sharp aim, he felt strength return. He shouted, hold the line, and they did. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, immortals pushing hard, but humans refusing to bend. One miner fell and another pulled him back. The fight was not clean, it was messy and raw. But it was real, and it was theirs outside the station. The decoy tug circled back, pilots guiding them with slow hands. They pushed the false plates right into the paths of the fleet guns. Beams fired and lit the black. Explosions flared across the wreck field. Sensors screamed with false data. The fleet paused in confusion, their patterns breaking. The humans inside the station felt the tremor of hesitation run through their enemy. Mark seized the moment. He signaled Anna, she shouted. To all fighters now push. They surged forward with a roar. Cutters and rifles striking hard. The immortals stumbled under the storm. More of them fell, their eyes wide, their perfect calm shattered. For the first time in centuries, they felt the taste of real fear. The bay grew silent only when the last invader pulled back, retreating to the pod. The door sealed behind them. Mark stood in the smoke, chest heaving. Anna wiped blood from her cheek. People looked around at each other, faces black with soot, hands shaking but alive. Cheers rose, then fell into tired silence. They had won this first battle, but everyone knew it was only the beginning. The commander slammed his hand on the arm of his chair, and his voice filled the fleet with cold rage. He said, these mortals dare wound us. They dare defy eternity. Very well. We will show them the weight of forever. He ordered the main guns charged and the entire fleet to surround the station. The sky outside Grey Belt Station filled with silver, hulls blotting out the stars, and inside the bay Mark looked at Anna and saw the fire in her eyes. He knew they had awakened something in their enemy, but he also knew they had shown a truth. Immortals could bleed, immortals could fall. And that truth was worth every scar they carried. The storm had only begun, and the price of arrogance would only grow heavier. Silver ships of the Immortal Empire closed tighter around Grey Belt Station until the stars were gone, and only metal filled the sky. Their guns glowed like suns waiting to burn. Inside the station, people whispered that no one had ever seen so many ships at once. Some felt their hope flicker, but others felt a different fire, the knowledge that they had already made the immortals bleed. Mark stood on the command deck with Anna beside him and a small crowd of tired fighters around the board. His shoulders ached and his eyes were red, but his voice was steady. He said, they believe we are cornered and broken. Let them believe. Let their pride guide them into our hands. Anna spread a map across the board. She traced the asteroid field that drifted a few clicks away, a field thick with rocks and broken hulls from wars long past. She said, if we can draw them into the field, their size will work against them. Our small ships can hide and strike. Their large hulls will be slowed and pinned. Mark nodded and told the tug pilots to prepare for one last run. The plan was not safe, but nothing was safe anymore. In the tunnels, children slept under blankets, while parents whispered over them. Lena moved from one group to another, checking wounds, handing water, giving words that carried more weight than any weapon. She said, you are still alive, and alive means strong. When she passed the schoolroom, she saw one child drawing again on scraps of paper. This time the picture was of a great ship breaking apart under a sky full of fire. The child looked up and said, is this what will happen? Lena smiled softly and answered, "It is what we will make happen on the flagship." The immortal commander paced his chamber with a frown carved deep on his face. He had never lost soldiers in such numbers. He had never seen their bodies fall without rising again. He demanded an answer from his council of long-lived captains. They gave only fear. They said these humans fight like creatures who have nothing to lose. They said their weapons cut through us in ways unknown. One captain whispered, "Perhaps their mortality is their strength." The commander struck the table with his hand and said, "Silence. No mortal is stronger than one who does not die." Yet even as he said it, his voice held doubt. The second strike came. At dawn cycle, the fleet fired beams that ripped through the dark. Gray Belt Station shook under the blows. Outer rings peeled away like bark. People cried out, but still they held. Mark shouted into his band for the tug pilots to move. Small shapes drifted from the wreck field. Not decos this time, but real craft loaded with scrap explosives and guided by hands that had mined rock since childhood. They slipped into the blind spots between the great silver hulls. Explosions burst across armored flanks. Sparks and fire spread where none had expected it. The fleet staggered for a moment, as if struck by an unseen hand. Anna's voice rang across the band, telling fighters to push. Groups of humans in patched suits launched from hidden ports. They carried rifles and cutters. They clung to enemy hulls like insects, cutting and planting charges. Immortals rushed to meet them, but were slowed by the narrow field. Their long lines broken, their pride torn again, and through it all Mark guided the fight from the deck, his mind racing, his voice calm. Every order simple and sharp. The battle stretched for hours. The field lit by fire and smoke. Immortals falling in numbers unseen for centuries. Some fled deeper into the fleet, some fought harder with rage. The commander watched in disbelief. He saw his perfect soldiers stumble and his endless fleet burn. And in his heart a seed of fear grew, not for his empire alone, but for himself. He had lived so long without tasting death that he had forgotten its scent. And now he smelled it close on the station. Food grew scarce. Air filters strained. Children coughed in the smoke. Lena moved among them with hands steady. She wiped faces. She told them stories of Earth, of forests and rivers. She told them humans came from storms older than empires. She said our bones are made from struggle and our hearts from fire. No immortal can take that away. And the people listened and drew strength from her words. In the command deck, Anna wiped sweat from her brow and looked at Mark. She asked how long. "Can we last?" Mark stared at the board and answered, "Until they break. Because we cannot afford to break first." He knew their weapons were nearly gone. Their tugs battered, their fighters tired. But he also knew the immortals were shaken. Every moment longer was another cut in their pride. The commander grew desperate. He called for his personal guard, warriors who had stood by him for ages. He said, "I will lead the strike myself. We will end this in one blow." His captains begged him to wait, but he silenced them. He would not let mortals think him weak. His flagship turned toward Gray Belt Station, its guns burning brighter than all others. His guard ready to descend. When Mark saw the flagship moving, he felt his chest tighten. Anna whispered that this was it, the final storm. He gathered the fighters and told them plain words. This ship holds their leader. If we break him, the rest will scatter. If we fall here, then nothing will remain. But if we stand, we will show the galaxy that immortals can die and mortals can rise. The fighters raised their weapons and shouted as one, their voices filling the tunnels and echoing through the wrecked halls. The flagship drew close, its shadow falling across the broken station, boarding pods armed and ready. The commander's eyes bright with fury and fear. Inside the station, Mark stood with Anna at his side and the people of Gray Belt behind him. Their bodies weak but their will unbroken. He whispered to himself that even if his heart stopped, he would not bow. He would not give his children or his people to chains. He would rather end in fire than live in silence. The last thing he heard, before the alarms screamed again, was the night watch singing low and steady. The song of a people who knew storms and did not run. The pods slammed against the hull, steel shrieked, sparks fell. The battle that would decide not only Grey Belt Station, but the truth of what it meant to be human, had begun. The flagship of the Immortal Empire locked against the broken hull of Grey Belt Station, with a force that shook every wall and tore plates from the frame. Alarms howled and red lights pulsed in every corridor. People clutched rails and braced for the storm. Mark stood in the cargo bay with Anna at his side, and the last fighters gathered behind them. He could feel the station groaning under the weight of the giant ship above. This was no raid. This was the hammer blow meant to crush them all in one strike. The bay doors split open as the boarding pod burned through. Sparks rained like falling stars. A hole ripped wide, and from it stepped the guard of the Immortal Commander, tall soldiers, wrapped in silver armor, eyes glowing with endless life, their steps heavy and calm as if nothing could stop them. Behind them came the commander himself, taller than all, his face smooth as stone and his gaze sharp as winter. His voice carried across the bay without effort. He said, "Mortals, you have fought with spirit, but spirit cannot fight forever. Bow, and I may let you serve in my empire. Resist, and I will show you what it means to challenge eternity." Mark lifted his cutter, and his voice was strong though his arms trembled. He said, "We will never bow because we do not fear death. We live with it every day, and that is why we fight harder than you can imagine." Anna raised her rifle, and the fighters shouted as one, their voices raw but fierce. The sound shook the air, and even the commander paused for a breath. The first clash came like thunder. Immortals surged forward, blades flashing. Humans met them with cutters and rifles. Sparks filled the bay. Screams echoed. The Immortals struck with skill honed over ages, but the humans struck with desperation that burned like fire. Each blow was given as if it might be the last, and that made it stronger than any practiced motion. Anna shot one guard through the chest, and the soldier staggered, his body trying to heal. But the chemical round burned deeper. He fell and did not rise. A cheer went up, though short, because another Immortal charged and cut down two miners in a single swing. Mark fought face to face with a guard, their blades clashing, sparks flying between them. The Immortal smiled as if sure of victory. Mark gritted his teeth and drove forward, pushing the cutter deep into the weak joint of the armor. The soldiers screamed and fell. Mark pulled free and turned to the next, his arms burning but his spirit steadying the tunnels. People heard the clash above, and instead of hiding, they began to move toward the fight. Welders carrying torches, cooks with heavy pans, even children passing buckets of water for the wounded. Lena led them with calm eyes. She shouted that every hand mattered, that this was not the fight of soldiers alone, but of a people who refused to be broken. She dragged a wounded fighter to safety and went back again, her hands never shaking. The commander stepped deeper into the bay, his guard thinning as humans pressed harder. He drew a long blade black as night and cut through a wall of crates with one swing. His voice rolled over the noise. "You are brave, but you are dust. I have lived 1,000 lives, and you have lived only one. You cannot win against the weight of forever." Mark heard and shouted back, "One life is enough when it is lived with purpose." The words carried through the bay and gave strength to tired arms. Anna fired again and struck another guard down. The fighters roared and pushed forward. The battle raged long and bloody. Immortals still strong but now shaken. They saw their brothers fall and not rise. Fear began to creep into eyes that had never known it. The humans did not stop. They fought shoulder to shoulder. They covered each other. They lifted the fallen and passed weapons down the line. The bay floor ran with sparks and blood. The smell of smoke and iron filled every breath. At the height of the clash, Mark saw the commander step toward him. Their eyes met across the chaos. The commander lifted his blade and pointed it like a promise. He said, "You will fall, and with you all your kind." Mark felt the weight of those words, and yet also felt the fire in his chest burn brighter. He stepped forward, leaving Anna behind, though she shouted his name. He knew this fight was his. He knew this moment would decide not just the station but the meaning of their struggle. They met in the center of the bay. Fighters pulling back to give space. The clash of blade and cutter rang like a bell. The commander struck fast and strong, each blow heavy enough to break steel. Mark dodged and blocked, his arms screaming. Sparks showered around them. The commander laughed a cold laugh. He said, "You are weak and fleeting. I will break you as time breaks all things." Mark shouted back that time breaks nothing that lives true. He struck with all his weight and cut deep into the black blade. A crack ran through it. The commander staggered, his eyes wide with shock. He had never seen his weapon fail. Mark pressed harder, his strikes wild but full of fire. He cut again, and the black blade shattered into shards. The fighters roared as the sound filled the bay. The commander fell to one knee, his body still strong, but his pride broken. He looked up at Mark and whispered, How can a mortal break eternity?" Mark raised his cutter and said, "Because we are not afraid to end." And he struck the final blow. The commander fell silent, his body bleeding real blood. The guards saw, and their courage cracked. They began to retreat step by step. Some fled back to the pods, some dropped weapons. The humans pressed forward shouting. Anna fired one last round, and the bay shook with the sound of victory. The Immortals pulled back into their ship and the pods detached. The great flagship shuddered and pulled away, its guns dim, its pride shattered. The people of Greybelt Station stood in the smoke and the silence that followed. They were cut and bruised and burned, but they were alive. Cheers rose and spread through the tunnels. People embraced, children cried and laughed. Lena knelt over the fallen and whispered prayers. Anna ran to Mark and held his arm. He was bleeding, but standing, his eyes bright though his body weak. She said, "You did it." He shook his head and answered, "No, we did it." All of us outside the station. The fleet wavered. Reports of the commander's fall spread like fire. Ships turned and pulled back. Captains who had believed in eternity now felt doubt for the first time. They had seen immortals fall. They had seen their leader bleed, and they knew the price of arrogance had only begun to be paid inside the station, people sang. Tired voices rising together. It was not a song of victory alone, but a song of survival. Of one life lived true against 1,000 lives lived in fear. Mark listened, and for the first time in many nights he let himself smile. He knew the fight was not over, but he also knew the truth was out. Immortals could be beaten. Mortals could endure. The fleet of the Immortal Empire drifted back from Greybelt Station like a tide that had lost its pull, their silver hulls no longer shining with pride but dull with smoke and scars. The flagship carried the broken body of the commander, and his silence was heavier than any weapon they had brought. Across the channels reports spread like fire. The unthinkable had happened. Immortals had fallen. Their blood had stained the decks. Their perfect calm had shattered. The myth of their eternity was cracked. Inside Greybelt Station, the people stood bruised and weary but alive, and in their eyes burned the light of something greater than victory. It was belief. Mark sat on the edge of a broken console in the command deck, his arms wrapped in bandages, his face streaked with dust. Anna stood beside him, scanning the outer screens. She whispered, "They are pulling away." He asked, "Do you think they will return?" She said, "They will try. Pride does not die easy, but the fear we planted will follow them." Mark nodded slowly, his body heavy but his heart awake. He said, "Then we have done more than survive. We have shown them what it means to be human." In the tunnels people gathered. Some wept for the fallen, others sang for the living. Lena moved among them with her hands still steady. She spoke softly to the children, telling them that their mothers and fathers had stood against giants and not broken. She said, "One life lived with courage can shake an empire." The children listened wide-eyed, and some drew again on scraps of paper. This time they drew humans standing tall while silver ships burned, their small hands sketching the truth the galaxy would soon learn. News spread beyond the station. Ships that had watched from a distance carried word to other colonies. Messages whispered from world to world. Humanity had faced the Immortal Empire and had not bowed. Stories grew with each telling. Some said a single miner cut down the commander with his own hands. Some said the station itself fought back with fire and steel, but the heart of the story was always the same. Humans had refused to bend, and the immortals had paid the price. In taverns and ports across the rim, people raised cups and shouted that mortality was not weakness. It was strength. On the flagship, the captains gathered in silence around the body of their fallen leader. For the first time in countless ages, they saw one of their own lying still. No breath, no healing, no rise, they whispered among themselves. That if he could die, then so could they. Doubt crept like frost through their long bones. Some demanded vengeance, others spoke of retreat. But none could speak with the same certainty as before. The foundation of their empire had cracked, and in that crack light had entered back in the bay. Mark walked among the wreckage with Anna at his side. They stepped over broken crates and twisted steel. People worked around them, lifting debris and pulling survivors from the rubble. Mark stopped to help a young miner raise a beam, and together they freed a man trapped beneath. The man coughed and whispered, "Thank you." Mark smiled faint, though his body ached. He said, "No need to thank me. We thank each other. We live together." Anna touched his arm and said, "This is why we won. Not because we are stronger, not because we are smarter, but because we never leave one another behind." Lena approached, carrying a child on her hip. She said, "Food is running low. Air scrubbers are tired. We will need help from other colonies soon." Mark nodded and said, "They will come. Word is spreading. No one will ignore what we have done here." Lena's eyes softened. She said, "Then perhaps the galaxy will learn that immortality is not the greatest gift. Perhaps the greatest gift is to know life is short and still choose to live it fully." The station gathered that night in the largest hall that still stood. Broken walls patched with canvas, lamps glowing weak but warm. People filled the space shoulder to shoulder, bruised faces lit by firelight. Mark stood at the front with Anna and Lena beside him. He looked at the crowd and spoke plain words, because plain words were enough. He said, "We were told to bow. We were told our lives were too small to matter. We were told eternity would crush us. But we stood, we fought, we bled, and still we breathe. We have shown the galaxy that one short life lived with courage is worth more than 1,000 years lived in fear." The hall shook with cheers and songs, voices rising together until the sound rolled through the tunnels and out into the stars. Even the wounded raised their hands. Even the children shouted with bright voices. Anna smiled through tears and whispered to Mark, "This is our answer." Lena closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. She knew it was not just a song. It was a promise far beyond Grey Belt Station. The immortal fleet limped home, their empire shaken, their people whispering. And though they would gather strength again, though they would plan to return, a seed had been planted that they could never remove. They had seen fear in their own eyes. They had felt blood in their own veins. They had learned that immortality was not shield enough against those who embraced death. As part of life, Mark stood by a cracked window, looking out at the stars. Anna joined him, her hand brushing his. He whispered, "Do you think they will come again?" She said, "Yes, but when they do, they will not face only us. They will face every human who heard this story. They will face a galaxy that knows they can fall." Mark nodded and felt a quiet peace. He said, "Then let them come. We will be ready, and if we fall, we will fall knowing we lived through." The stars outside shone brighter as the wreckage drifted away. The silence of space, deep but not empty. Grey Belt Station floated scarred but alive, a beacon of what it meant to be human, not endless, not perfect, but unbroken. And as the night stretched long and quiet, the people inside slept for the first time without fear, their dreams full of fire and song. And the galaxy would remember this day as the day the Immortal Empire tried to conquer humans and paid the ultimate price.